The story of Penny McAllister begins with her upbringing in Germany as the eldest daughter of Desmond, a teacher and soldier. Surrounded by the arts, music, theater, and school drama, Penny grew into a bright and charming young woman. At 16, she met Duncan McAllister in the mess bar of a military office in Germany. Born in 1961, Duncan had attended boarding school in the UK and, following in his father's footsteps, joined the army, specializing in signals. Before being posted to Germany, Duncan had been engaged to a woman in the UK, but the relationship ended prior to his deployment. Upon meeting Penny, he was immediately struck by her beauty. Though initially awkward and even rude, he soon grew to adore her. After mustering the courage to visit her, their relationship blossomed, and they became inseparable, spending every possible moment together. In 1983, when Duncan was reassigned to the UK, he proposed to Penny before leaving. They married the following year, when Penny was 18 and Duncan was 23. The newlyweds moved to Wiltshire, where Duncan enrolled at the Royal Military College while Penny continued her studies. Their early years of marriage were filled with happiness, adventure, and travel, fueled by a shared love for diving, which they had picked up during a vacation. However, their lives took a dramatic turn when Duncan was posted to Northern Ireland during the height of the Troubles. Unlike most British Army wives, who remained in the UK due to the dangerous conditions, Penny chose to accompany him. The couple settled in County Armagh, the smallest county in Northern Ireland, known for Loch Ness, the largest freshwater lake in the UK and Ireland. In February 1990, Duncan and Penny decided to establish an army diving club to expand their social circle. Duncan, the more experienced diver, took on the role of instructor, while Penny managed the administrative side. Among the members who joined the club was Susan Christie, a young, petite soldier from the Ulster Defence Regiment, UDR. Susan, the daughter of a non-commissioned officer in the UDR, was known to have her father wrapped around her finger. Ambitious and determined, she had joined the UDR just before her 20th birthday, eager to follow in her father's footsteps. She was initially part-time but excelled as she was a perfectionist, which suited army life. She was an attention seeker who flirted skillfully to captivate men, but never went too far. Yet, she'd pout and act like a brat if denied that spotlight. This behavior only intensified when she joined the diving team. Susan flirted with Duncan, a married man, and they began a physical affair. Though Duncan claimed it was just a fling and he loved his wife Penny, their relationship escalated with Duncan taking Susan's virginity and their meeting for sex in secret. Penny suspected Susan and Duncan's behavior, though she lacked proof. Trusting her intuition, she watched them closely, hoping the situation would resolve itself. However, Penny's optimism would prove misguided, but Susan's behavior around Duncan, particularly in the diving circle, became unpredictable. Susan was jealous of Penny as she treated her horribly. She was rude and would ignore Penny even if she was to even just say hello. It wasn't enough for Susan to have Duncan in the palm of her hand. She would also try and make Duncan jealous if they all went to the pub after a dive and she wasn't sitting next to him. She would flirt with the other soldiers around them. Duncan would describe it as leading them on, and if any of them tried for a kiss or anything more, Susan would run back to him crying, saying she was being harassed. Susan, rightly so, began to get a reputation for throwing accusations around. She also began to fake illness when she wasn't getting the attention she wanted and was treated in hospital a few times when there was nothing wrong with her. In September 1990, a serious incident occurred. Duncan and Susan dived with the club near the wrecked SS Triple, which had sunk in 1917 off County Antrim after hitting a mine. It was a deeper dive than usual. The wreck lay 30 meters down. Duncan, the cautious leader, had all stopped mid-ascent for 2 minutes to avoid decompression sickness. When they surfaced, he warned that anyone feeling unwell should contact him or a supervisor. Everyone, including Susan, said they were fine. The next morning, Duncan received a call that Susan was, to no one's surprise, unwell. She had joint pains, a symptom of the bends, so Duncan took her to a specialist. Though she could walk to the car and into the clinic, when left in the waiting room, she dramatically collapsed and needed a nurse's attention. The doctor confirmed her symptoms matched surfacing too quickly, but found it curious that Duncan, her diving partner, showed no signs. Despite 2 compression chamber runs, Susan continued feeling unwell concerning the doctor. The week before during a training course, and perhaps the pain she was experiencing was from that. Both the doctor and Duncan were furious that their time and energy had been wasted on what was probably a false alarm. But they weren't the only ones. Once pissed off, Penny had been left at home for hours while her husband was attending to the woman she suspected he was having an affair with. Penny was so fed up that she actually called her mother. She didn't tell her mother in so many words what was going on, but her mother would understand how hard it was to live on an army base as she had done it with her own husband, and she would be clever enough to read between the lines. Next to a woman's intuition, a mother's intuition is like having a superpower. This was the only second time Penny had opened up about her worries. Last summer, she went to Germany to see a friend and told them about her concerns over Duncan and Susan. She also confided the loss of her pregnancy, but kept it from Duncan due to their relationship troubles. That weekend, Duncan had Susan over while Penny visited her friend in Germany, their first time being together overnight. Susan soon professed her love for Duncan, but he refused to return the sentiment. He brushed her off, confessing he felt unable to express his love due to his loyalty to his wife. He had no issue betraying his wife by getting intimate with Susan, but drawing the line at declaring his love as that would be too much of a betrayal. The diving club arranged a trip to Ascension Island in October 1990, and at first, there was a problem with Penny's flight, which elated Susan. But then, Duncan intervened, getting Penny on a flight. This infuriated Susan, who was very hostile towards Penny, who was just trying to ensure a smooth trip. Penny organized the equipment and cooked for everyone. But Susan, in one of her moods, refused to eat Penny's food or help her. Duncan soon realized that Susan wasn't just in love with him, but obsessed. He was stuck dividing his time between the 2 women. Even though he was a knight with Susan, he still managed to slip away with her a few times throughout the trip. Duncan pulled Susan on her behavior towards Penny. And while he was concerned for Penny over Susan's behavior, he was even more concerned when they actually seemed to be getting on. They would sit together, have long conversations, and get on towards the end of the trip. After the trip, Duncan decided he would have to end the affair with Susan. It was clear by this stage that Susan was dangerous, and if she got close to Penny, she could tell her of the affair and his marriage would be over, and it also put a risk to his career. Duncan told Susan the affair was over, but she was having none of it. She cried and then totally ignored the fact that it was over. On the 2nd of 1990, Susan told Duncan she thought she was pregnant. Upset, he panicked, couldn't understand how this happened. Susan said she was sick on their Ascension Island trip, but didn't say anything, not wanting to be stopped from diving. When discussing options, Duncan made his views clear, but said it was Susan's decision, and he'd support her. The first option was termination. She could have the baby, but he'd be uninvolved financially, or she could have the baby. Name him as the father, but he'd lose his job. Termination was the only option for Susan. She didn't want to raise the baby alone, and she wanted to keep her career. On a while later, Susan told Duncan she was pregnant, but the doctor said it'd be best to wait before arranging an abortion. Abortion was illegal up to 2020, so she'd have had to travel. A month later, Susan announced she'd lost the baby. Convenient as she never went to the hospital or took time off work, Duncan stayed in touch that week after Susan lost the baby, trying to console her over the loss. However, Susan later contacted Duncan after meeting up with Penny for lunch. She was very angry with Duncan because she had told Penny about the miscarriage and claimed that she too had lost a baby, fully aware of what Susan was going through. Susan was furious and called Duncan to find out why he had not told her this himself. Of course, he could not have, as Penny had not informed him, and he had not even known she was pregnant. He was devastated that Penny had not confided in him, and he also realized that he could not ask Penny about it. Susan had to go to the UK for a work course in 1991. This helped end her affair with Duncan as he was also posted to Germany. But they still continued seeing each other, much to Penny's annoyance, until Susan made a scene trying to get Duncan to go out with her. The weekend before Susan was to go to the UK, Penny went to Dublin with some army wives. Duncan and Susan would spend that same weekend together, and it would be the last time they would have together. So they made the most of it. They went diving together, went for walks, and of course had a bit of housework. Susan was upset that things were finally coming to an end, but told Duncan she was happy they'd remain friends. However, people that gullible think they can stay friends after an affair. After the weekend was over and Penny returned home, Duncan was surprised to receive a call from Susan. He thought that their weekend together clearly signaled that they were over. Obviously, Duncan didn't understand the staying friends bit was Susan's way of holding on. She continued to call Duncan at work and even made plans to meet Penny for a walk and lunch before she left for the UK on Tuesday, March 1991. Duncan received a call from Susan. She asked what could have happened if he wasn't married. This was a risky question with a perilous answer that could lead to dire consequences. Duncan said it was pointless to consider as things are as they are. He noted they'd face other challenges as she's a soldier and he's an officer, and their relationship was prohibited in the army even if she was commissioned as she was stationed in Northern Ireland while he couldn't be there long term. Susan agreed and was upset by the truths he shared before ending the call. The following day, Wednesday, March, Penny dropped Duncan to work and headed into town as she had to drop some stuff off at the army-run shop, and then later go to meet Susan for their walk with the dogs and lunch out. This morning will be the last time Duncan would see his beautiful wife alive. Penny also had to prepare for a visit from her parents and was busy at home getting things ready. Penny told Duncan she was not looking forward to her lunch days with Susan as she had rescheduled twice already, and she was really too busy that day to meet with her. But she decided to go anyway. Later that morning, Duncan received a call from Susan asking if he knew where Penny was. She tried ringing the house, but no one answered. She couldn't remember if they were supposed to meet at 11 a.m. or 11:30 a.m. Duncan, exasperated by the call, told Susan to go to the meeting place at 11 and wait there for Penny, then ended the call. Duncan headed out of the office that afternoon, known for a fitness test which was a 3-mile run. As he returned to the office, he met with his commanding officer, who was not looking too pleased. Duncan thought he was coming to tell him that he was not going to be going to Germany, but instead, he had graver news. He sat Duncan down and told him that Penny was dead. At first, Duncan could not take in the information. His commanding officer continued to tell him about the circumstances of Penny's death. It became more real. Penny was out for a walk in John Carr Forest and collapsed with her dogs and was attacked. He was told that there was another woman with her, and she was injured and brought to the hospital. Duncan knew straight away who this woman was, but that didn't concern him straight away. He knew Penny's parents were to arrive in a few hours, and he would have to break this devastating news to them, and also had the ordeal of telling his own parents. The police secured the area where Penny's body was found, and they took witness statements from a family who had been having a picnic nearby. When Susan emerged from the forest, crying, screaming, and bloodied, she was unable to stand properly, and her hands were covered in blood. Her clothes were ripped, and she had scratches on her face and a stab wound to her torso. The woman of the family went to help Susan, and her husband went to call the police. Susan, meanwhile, begged for someone to find Penny. After she explained that they were both attacked by a man and she had managed to escape, but that Penny was still in the forest, the police arrived and went into the forest. A local doctor treated Susan for her injuries. They followed the trail and soon found Penny lying on the forest floor covered in blood, and her throat had been cut. This is where she bled out and died. Susan was brought to the hospital and treated for her scratches and stab wound, then sent home. That night, Duncan rang her to see how she was and to ask her what happened. All she kept saying was sorry, and that she tried to help but couldn't. He agreed to go see her after seeing Penny. Susan offered to go with him and was very insistent, but Duncan said it was something he had to do on his own. The following day, he visited Susan at her home, and she again tearfully kept apologizing to him for not saving Penny. Duncan, as usual, believed since crocodile tears and told her it wasn't her fault. Susan told him what happened. Penny and Susan met up as planned. They went for a walk in the forest on a lovely day. Susan stopped to tie her shoelaces, while Penny went ahead with the dogs. Penny's dog started barking furiously, and Susan saw a man standing over Penny on the ground. Penny was bleeding and the man had a knife. The man then attacked Susan, pulling her, knocking her down and trying to take her clothes. Susan kneed him and then went to Penny's aid. Susan couldn't stop Penny's bleeding, and the man had fled the scene, so she ran to the car park. The attacker was of average height, had brown hair, blue eyes, and was wearing a green jacket, blue jeans, and white sneakers. The police visited Susan's house and requested her to go to the forest where she and Penny were attacked. The police suspected Susan was withholding information, and they were right. Susan and Duncan did not disclose their affair to the police, as they agreed it was irrelevant to Penny's case. They agreed to keep quiet about the affair if the police found out. The police questioned Susan extensively at the station throughout the day. She complained that the officer was not courteous, but Duncan said, "That's how they gather evidence." Susan felt she was mistreated and that the police were against her. She told Duncan they would speak to a friend who knew about their affair, which worried him. Duncan tells Susan that the police are searching for a white car and a description of the perpetrator. This is a relief for Susan since she is not the only one who saw the man she described. Overnight, Duncan thought he should approach the police and tell them about the affair. He also felt it would save time, and they would focus solely on finding who killed Penny. Duncan wasted no time in contacting the police, providing them with a comprehensive account. The authorities had little need for further questioning, merely inquiring about his familiarity with Dromkra Forest and Susan's recent visit. Duncan denied knowledge of the former, but acknowledged the latter, requesting discretion regarding the Army's involvement, which the police stated was not feasible. He was instructed to return to Northern Ireland following Penny's funeral in England. When he arrived in England, his father picked him up at the airport, and he told him about the affair on the eve of Penny's funeral. He knew that Susan had been arrested for Penny's murder. Now he had to tell Penny's family about the affair. He called Penny's parents and told them everything. They were kind during the funeral the next day, even letting Duncan sit next to them. There are better people out there than some, and I see that with the families of victims, especially the parents. Meanwhile, Susan was being questioned, and she had stuck to her story throughout. The police told her that Duncan had confessed to their affair, and Susan began to deflect and change her story. Suddenly, she had memory loss and could no longer remember what happened that day in the forest. The police were watching Susan's behavior throughout and noticed that she seemed to like the attention she was getting during the interviews. She ate everything that was put in front of her. She tried to befriend the female officer that was assigned to the case. This was not the typical behavior of someone who had witnessed the brutal murder of their friend and then implicated in us. When questioned, Duncan was asked about his relationship with Susan and whether he and Penny had an open marriage. Police also asked if Penny didn't help Susan in an accident during a dive, and if Duncan forced Susan to terminate a pregnancy. Susan claimed that Penny had provoked her that day, causing her distress and a blackout, after which Penny was found dead. Police believed that Susan was withholding the full truth, possibly to cover for Duncan. They also questioned why Duncan had conspired with Susan to cover up the affair unless he had something to do with. Why had he spent 2 days with this supposed ex-lover following the news of his wife's death? Duncan flatly denied everything, and his statement was prepared, and he was released. Susan was kept in custody where she quickly adjusted to prison life. Her father visited her and so did friends, but she never admitted to anyone what she did on June 1, 1992. Susan appeared at Downpatrick Court and pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. The Crown's opening statement was damning. They said Susan had lured her lover's wife to a secluded spot and then brutally murdered her. It was a case of premeditated murder. Then she tried to cover up the murder by inventing an attacker and injuring herself. Forensic scientist Joseph Corr testified he visited the crime scene, believed Penny was attacked from behind, grabbed by coat and hair on left side with one earring pulled off. Penny's neck was slashed, causing immediate unconsciousness. Police found a recently sharpened boning knife 260 yards away, which Corr believed was the murder weapon. Susan's blue jacket had Penny's blood type, but not Susan's. The doctor that attended Susan at the scene that day was next to take the stand. He described Susan curled up on the floor of the car park near the forest. He patched up the small wound on her leg and the scratches across her stomach. Her underwear was slightly ripped and blood-stained, and when Silverton removed her gloves that she was wearing on the rather mild day, which didn't warrant the need for gloves, her hands were covered in blood. But there were no injuries when he did a follow-up on Susan a few days later. He summarized that her injuries were self-inflicted. The state pathologist then took to the stand, and he described the horrific injuries to Penny and agreed with the forensic scientist that Penny would have lost consciousness straight away and would have been dead within a few minutes. As the horrific injuries were being described, Susan could be heard sobbing. A doctor was called, and it was determined that Susan was not medically fit to continue the trial. When the trial resumed, Duncan took the witness stand and had to recount all the details of his affair with Susan. The defense exploited Duncan's demeanor, accusing him of being cold and indifferent towards Susan and ignoring the emotional toll the affair had on her in order to continue it to satisfy his own needs. He acted callously, telling her he loved her, but in a different way than he loved his wife. As Duncan was being cross-examined by the defense, Susan sat there weeping. Next time, Susan for 3 days. She talked about her relationship with Duncan, hoping that he would leave his wife for her, though that wasn't her initial intention. She admitted that she liked being the center of attention, but denied faking illness or injury to maintain that role. She also denied lying about her pregnancy and miscarriage, and that Duncan had told her she was right to want to have an abortion. Susan grew close to Penny on Ascension Island as fellow divers. Susan admitted to being jealous of Penny, who sometimes felt the same. Penny confronted Duncan about their affair, but never mentioned it to Susan. I doubt this. If Penny hadn't told Duncan about her miscarriage, she didn't confront him about the affair. Penny was classy and knew Duncan would never leave her for someone like Susan. On the day of the murder, Susan claimed she felt unwell and tried canceling the meet with Penny, who had already left. They met, drove to the forest, and Susan couldn't recall the attack, claiming memory loss. She denied buying and sharpening the knife, but later admitted lying to the police, realizing she must have been the attacker. A psychiatrist assessed Susan, concluding she had depression and stress reaction at the time. Another psychiatrist found her reaction normal with only mild depression, not a mental illness, and that she fabricated memory loss. The trial took a break for the weekend, and when it resumed the following Monday, Law Justice Kelly provided his instructions and summary to the jury. He asked them, is it more likely than not that Susan Christie was suffering from mental abnormalities when she planned, premeditated, and executed her plan to kill Penny? That is the sole focus of this case. After 4 hours of deliberation and being informed that a majority verdict would be accepted, the 8 men and 4 women of the jury reached their verdict. She was found guilty of manslaughter and cleared of the murder of Penny. Before pronouncing sentence, Law Justice Kelly explained to the court the factors that would influence his decision. He acknowledged the gravity of the offense and the devastating impact of Penny's death on her loved ones. However, he also had to consider the personal circumstances that drove Susan to commit the crime. He pointed out that Susan was a young woman with no prior criminal history and no experience of physical relationships. The judge stressed that her affair with Duncan had triggered the events that led to Penny's death, and he was confident that Susan was unlikely to repeat such a heinous act. In the end, the judge sentenced Susan to a mere 5 years in prison for the heinous crime of slitting Penny's throat. It's shocking that such a lenient sentence was handed down. Upon hearing the verdict, Penny's mother was overcome with grief, crying out and shaking with emotion. In contrast, Susan showed no immediate reaction to the news. The public was outraged by the leniency of the sentence, and rightly so. Regardless of the circumstances that led Susan to kill Penny, it's clear that Penny was the true victim. The judge's consideration of Susan's age was irrelevant in this case. After all, Penny was only 24 years old when her life was brutally cut short. Where was the judge's consideration for her youth? This injustice is infuriating. The Attorney General's office referred the case to the Court of Appeal to review Susan's sentence. In 1994, A 3-judge panel examined the case and ruled that Susan didn't have depression as she was never treated for it and didn't miss work. They found she planned the killing and tried to cover it up. Her sentence was increased to 9 years. Susan was released from prison in October 1995 after serving just short of 5 years, including time served on remand. While preparing for release, she worked outside the prison. One of her colleagues described her as a man-hungry schemer, and a businessman that had worked with her since she fully left prison described her as the most manipulative person you were ever likely to meet. I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her. Duncan never visited her in prison, and she was dishonorably discharged from the army. It is said that she changed her name and disappeared. On the evening of March 14, 2003, at the Hobbit pub in Southampton, England, the atmosphere was relaxed as patrons enjoyed their time. Among them were a young woman named Hannah Foster and her friend, both having a pleasant evening. As the night progressed and the clock neared 10:50 p.m., the two friends decided to leave the pub. Since it was late, Hannah's friend took a bus from Portswood Road and headed home. Meanwhile, Hannah chose to walk, as her house was only about 800 meters away, roughly half a mile. Hannah lived with her father, Trevor Foster, her mother, Hilary Foster, and her younger sister, Sarah. The Foster family were early sleepers and risers, so they typically went to bed early. That night, they assumed Hannah would return home, have something to eat, and go to bed on her own. However, when Hilary woke up at 5 a.m. the next morning, she was alarmed to find that Hannah was nowhere in the house. Normally, Hannah's walk home would take no more than 30 minutes, but by then, several hours had passed. Concerned, Hilary tried calling her daughter, but Hannah wasn't answering her phone. Soon, Trevor and Sarah also became aware of Hannah's absence. In response, Trevor contacted the friend who had accompanied Hannah to the Hobbit pub the previous night. The friend recounted the same story. They had left the pub together, and Hannah had decided to walk home alone. After this, Hannah's family also tries to find her themselves. But by now, it was already 10:30 in the morning, so Hannah's father starts to worry a lot about his daughter. Because of this, he goes to the Southampton police station and files a missing complaint for him. Now the police start investigating the missing person case from their side and first trace her phone. Well, the good thing was that Hannah's phone was active, and the police traced the phone through the mobile towers. Naturally, the location of Hannah's phone was showing approximately 20 to 25 miles away from her home. Now the police reached there within an hour. Where the police found Hannah's phone was the city's recycling center, and along with the phone, they also found Hannah's bag there, but Hannah was not found. On March 15th, Hannah is also extensively searched for, but her whereabouts are not found. As they continue the search, March 16th arrives and Southampton police receive a call from an anonymous man from the outskirts of the city. He informs them that he has just seen a girl's body in the bushes. A police team is dispatched to the location provided by the man. Since the previous day, the police have been searching for Hannah Foster, and they also had her picture. Therefore, the police first compare Hannah's picture with the discovered dead body, and they believe it to be Hannah Foster's. Subsequently, Hannah's family is also summoned, and upon seeing a member of their family in this condition, they become quite emotional. Nonetheless, the body is then sent for post-mortem. The police have to wait for several hours for it. However, when the post-mortem report arrives, it states that Hamill was first ripped and then murdered by strangulation. However, some traces of the killer's semen were found on Hannah's clothes, and this made the police believe that the case would be solved soon because DNA would be extracted from the semen and matched with the database to find the killer. But the police's imagination proved wrong when the DNA sample of the killer was not found in their database. Anyway, here the police, losing hope, check Hannah's call details, which leads the investigators to take another step towards solving this case. Actually, Hannah had last called the emergency number 999 from her phone, and the operator had answered the call. The call lasted for 50 seconds. After that, the police reached the operator and collect Hannah's call recording from there. In addition, the operator said, "I kept saying this is emergency helpline. What's an emergency?" for 50 seconds, but there was no response from the other end. When investigators enhanced the recording of Hannah's call, they realize that she is sitting in a moving vehicle. Additionally, there is another faint voice with a South Asian accent. The man asks Hannah questions while she sits quietly, appearing scared and intimidated. After obtaining the call recording, the investigating team accelerates progress in Hannah Foster's murder case. Now the police also check all the CCTV cameras in the area where Hannah's friend last bid her farewell and caught a bus. After scrutinizing several CCTV footages from that road, the police eventually narrow down to 7 suspect vehicles. On the other hand, Hannah's parents are eager to see their daughter's killer brought to justice swiftly. They now also discuss these 7 vehicles in public. In the meantime, on March 26th, Hannah's parents talked to people through a local crime TV show called Crime Watch about those cars. As a result, it emerged that one of the 7 suspect vehicles shown on TV was a van belonging to their company, Hazelwood Foods. The supervisor, James Dennis, called in and said that the driver of this van does not have his own vehicle, so he also uses this van to come and go from his home. Furthermore, that night, the driver had gone to deliver on this road. The time and location of the van were exactly where Hannah had started to walk home alone. After that, the police get a good lead for the first time in this case. But the man driving the van was named Maninder Pal Singh Kohli. Upon speaking to the company supervisor, it was found that on the morning of March 15th, Maninder Pal came to work, but there were some marks on his face, whereas there were no marks on his face the previous day, that is on the 14th. Additionally, on March 15th, Maninder only worked half a day and then took half a day off citing a back pain reason. However, it was only later discovered by the police that Maninder hadn't returned to work since that day. Now hearing the whole story, investigating officers along with forensic experts arrived at Hazelwood Company. Subsequently, the van driven by Maninder was thoroughly examined by forensic experts, and some traces of semen and blood were found in his vehicle as well. With all this evidence, such as Maninder Pal's disappearance, finding semen and blood in his van, they were pointing fingers directly at him for Hannah's murder. However, apart from this, the police once again scrutinized Maninder Pal's van through CCTV cameras, and it becomes clear from the CCTV footage that Maninder Pal had taken his van to the recycling center on the night of March 14th, and where Hannah's body was found, his van had also passed through that road. Maninder Pal had now become the prime suspect for the police. Therefore, the police now embark on the search for Maninder Pal, and first they go to his home address obtained from the sandwich company where he used to work. There, Maninder Pal's wife and 2 children used to live, and his wife was a citizen of the UK. But upon reaching there, the police learn something that completely changes the course of the case. In fact, Maninder's wife reveals that he had actually left for India on March 18th, because Maninder's mother was very ill. After learning this, it was imperative for the Southampton police to apprehend Maninder Pal in the Hannah Foster murder case, but it was equally challenging. And then amidst all this, when a blood sample is taken from one of Maninder Pal's sons and the DNA is extracted from it, it matches the DNA found on Hannah's clothes and inside Maninder Pal's van. Now, because the son inherits about half of his father's genes, therefore, the DNA of both the father and son is approximately 99.99% identical. It had already been confirmed that Maninder Pal was indeed the real culprit. After that, the police from England contacts India through the government. Now, since Maninder Pal's ancestral home was in the city of Chandigarh in India, assistance is sought from the police there. Subsequently, the Chandigarh police obtained the address of Maninder's house and reached there. Here, the police find out that Maninder Pal had come to meet his mother a few days ago, but after staying there for 3 to 4 days, he left. Since then, he has not contacted his home. The police also learn another piece of information from that and her pal's family at home that when he was in England, he used to wear a turban and keep a beard. But when he came to India, he got a clean shave and also got his haircut. Until now, Hannah's parents had also found out about their daughter's killer and they were also waiting for him to be caught. But now the Chandigarh police was not giving this case much priority. By this time, the news of this case had not even appeared in the Indian media, so normal people didn't know much about it. As time passed slowly, there was not much progress in the investigation. A considerable amount of time had passed, so Hannah's parents took it upon themselves to catch the killer. Then, Hannah's parents took it upon themselves to catch the killer. Then, about 15 months after their daughter's death on July 10, 2004, they come to India. At this time, they were only in India for 10 days. After that, they come straight to Chandigarh and speak to the local media there, appealing to catch their daughter's killer, Maninder Pal. Apart from this, Hannah's parents had separate pictures of Maninder. In one photo, he had a beard and a turban, while in another photo, he had shaved his beard and cut his hair. It was easy to identify Maninder through these pictures. After this, Hannah's parents waited for a few days, but then they decided to go to Delhi because there are national and international media offices. After this step by Hannah's parents, the news of their daughter's murder spread throughout India within 24 hours. The headline of every newspaper and news channel became Hannah Foster and Maninder Powell. Here, Hannah's parents also arranged a free hotline so that anyone who knew about the murderer could call this number. The Southampton police here announced through a news agency called The Sun that they would give 5 million Indian rupees to the person who provides any information about Maninder Pal. By now, this news had spread like wildfire throughout India. Then, on July 15, 2004, a car driver residing in the city of Darjeeling in the state of West Bengal, India, called a retired police officer whom he knew. Now this police officer had already retired. The driver called the officer and told him, "There is a man who has been living here for a few months, and his appearance resembles that of Hannah Foster's killer as shown in the news. He started appearing here shortly after Hannah's murder." Upon hearing the driver's words, the retired officer immediately sets out to see this man. The officer remembered Maninder Pal's face because they were following this case through the news channel. Afterwards, when that driver showed the police officer the man, the officer was quite surprised. Then he immediately contacted the local police, and the local police caught Maninder Pal in the bus going from Kalimpong town to Nepal. Here, the police find out that Maninder Pal was planning to flee to Nepal after seeing his news on TV channels and newspapers. Besides, the police also find out that Maninder Pal had changed his name to Mike Davis in West Bengal. In addition to Maninder, there was also a woman on the bus, and then it was revealed that Maninder had remarried after coming to India. Now Maninder was arrested and brought to Delhi, and during the custody of a few days here, Maninder confessed to his crime. Then he told the whole story of how he murdered Hannah that night. The story was something like this. Actually, on the night of March 14, 2003, Maninder was parked on that road drinking in his van where Hannah passed by. But when he saw Hannah, bad thoughts started coming to his mind. Afterwards, he forcibly kidnapped Hannah and placed her in the van. Although there, Hannah requested to be released from Maninder, but Maninder paid no heed to her requests. In the meantime, Hannah also called the emergency helpline number, but due to Maninder's presence, she couldn't say anything. This led the call operator to believe it might be a misdial. Later, Maninder takes Hannah to a deserted area and rapes her. However, after committing the crime, he realizes that if he lets Hannah go alive, she will go to the police and file a complaint. Therefore, Maninder strangles her to death. Then he disposes of Hannah's body where it was found. On March 15th, the next day, Maninder takes half a day off from work under the pretext of a back pain. But he had Hannah's mobile phone and handbag with him, so he dumps them in a recycling bin at the city recycling center. Afterwards, he goes to one of his friends and asks for some money on loan because he had to go to India to meet his sick mother. However, his friend doesn't have as much money as Maninder needed. Then Maninder comes back home and also tells his British wife that his mother is sick in India, and he needs to go there and requires some money. Understanding Maninder's need, his wife talks to her father. And on March 17th, Maninder's father-in-law lends him some money. The very next day, Maninder catches a flight to India. However, the excuse of his mother being sick was just a pretext. In reality, Maninder had come to India to escape from the England police. Upon arriving in India, Maninder goes to Chandigarh, his ancestral home, meets his mother, but here he completely changes his appearance. After changing his appearance, Maninder goes to Darjeeling, and after some time he changes his name and marries another woman there, where he starts living thereafter. Now, because neither anyone in India knew about Hannah Foster's murder nor about Maninder Pal, Maninder wasn't caught for 15 months. But then when Hannah's parents come to India, only then is Maninder caught. Anyway, after that, Maninder is brought to Delhi. And then on July 28, 2004, giving an interview to a news channel, he confessed his crime on TV. But upon the whole incident, while confessing, Maninder denies and says, "That night I had drunk a lot. I didn't want to kill Hannah, but then Hannah started threatening to complain to the police. Although I threatened her a lot, but she didn't agree, which led me to kill her." However, in August 2004, Maninder Pal changed his statement. He said, "I didn't do all this willingly, but it was done to me forcibly." After this statement, Maninder was placed under judicial custody in Delhi, and then the process of extradition to Britain begins. This process takes about 3 years. But finally, on June 8, 2007, the court granted permission for Maninder Powell to go to England. Once in England, Hampshire police arrest Maninder. Then Maninder's blood sample is taken, and it matches 100% with the DNA found from Hannah's clothes and semen obtained from the van. After that, from December 10, 2007, the trial begins in the Winchester Crown Court. Here, Maninder appeals not guilty to all the charges against him. Maninder said, "That night, some criminals broke the window of the van and threw Hannah's body inside the van. Now, because they was drunk to trap me, those criminals forced me to rip Hannah, and they may even force to kill her." Even in court, Hazelwood Fruits Company supervisor James Dennis testified. But Maninder said, "I borrowed 16,000 euros from James, and he is also under the misconception that I am having an affair with his wife. That's why James is targeting me." Maninder also said, "Maybe James hired those 3 men to frame me and force me to commit this crime on the night of March 14th. But in the end, when the police investigated Maninder Pal's all statements, it all turned out to be lies. And finally, on November 25, 2008, all the allegations against Maninder Pal were proven. After that, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Now he will be imprisoned without parole for at least 24 years. At the time of sentencing, he was 41 years old, and he will remain in jail until February 1930. Of the 5 million rupees reward offered for catching Maninder Pal, 367,000 rupees were given to the taxi driver who first informed the police about Maninder Pal. With this, the money was divided among 12 other people because besides the taxi driver Jason Lepsher, those people also played an important role in solving this case. However, Jason used that money to buy land and then established a school for disadvantaged children on it named the Hannah Memorial Academy in Foster's memory. Then in February 2006, when Hannah's parents visited Darjeeling and learned about this, they were very pleased. When these people returned to England, Hannah's parents started a registered charity to help Jason along with other people. This now greatly helps Jason Lepsher's school. So friends, this was the complete story of the Hannah Foster murder case. Michael Van Zant, originally from Michigan, spent much of his life traveling the world as a member of the United States Air Force. While stationed at a base in Japan, he met his future wife, and together they had 3 children. Michael served 2 tours in Iraq and was widely regarded as a devoted and loving father by everyone who knew him. After 12 years of active duty, he transitioned to civilian life, taking a job at Edwards Air Force Base in California, where he trained security personnel. Despite amicably ending his marriage, Michael maintained a positive relationship with his ex-wife and remained deeply involved in his children's lives. As he adjusted to life on his own, Michael re-entered the dating scene and worked to build a stable future for his family. In 2016, he was approved for a mortgage to purchase a house, eager to provide a better home for his children than the apartment he had been renting. On March 5, 2016, Michael drove to Hermosa Beach, California, about 2 hours from his home in Lancaster. He had been invited by a coworker to join a group of her friends for a weekend outing to watch a televised mixed martial arts fight. After the match, the group decided to go bar hopping along Hermosa Beach's Pier Plaza. At around 10:15 p.m., while waiting in line outside a bar called American Junkie, Michael mentioned he was going to the liquor store next door to use the restroom. He never rejoined the group. Concerned, his friends tried calling him throughout the night, but their calls went straight to voicemail. Michael's sudden disappearance left his friends and family deeply worried, as it was completely out of character for him. He did not respond to any texts, They continued to bar hop along Pier Plaza before heading back to their hotel. Michael's vehicle was still parked there. It was also still there the following morning. Michael's friends returned home still unsure of where he had gone. Concern for Michael picked up on March 7th when he began to miss obligations. He did not show up for work, and he failed to meet his son for a scheduled oral surgery with a necessary insurance form. When Michael's friend from work found out he never returned from Hermosa Beach, she filed a missing persons report with the local authorities. Friends and family members who went to look for Michael in Hermosa Beach were told that it was too soon to begin an investigation there. While waiting for the police to take Michael's disappearance seriously, those close to him began a grassroots search canvassing the area with flyers and asking for information on Facebook. Pier Plaza has a high concentration of security cameras, and there were hopes that it would help solve the case. After a few false starts in attempting to find Michael in the hours of footage, a timeline of Michael's evening was pieced together. Security footage shows him with a group of friends in line with American Junkie, as well as him leaving to go a group of friends in line with American Junkie, as well as him leaving to go to the liquor store. He is seen on camera going into the store and leaving after about a minute when he was not able to find a restroom there. While he was gone, his friends had decided to move on to a different bar. Michael is seen circling the plaza, apparently looking for his friends and just missing them several times as they bar hopped. He returned to the liquor store later in the evening to purchase a small bottle of whiskey. While he is at the counter, he is seen trying to use his cell phone, but the screen does not light up, seeming to indicate that the phone was not working, possibly because the battery was dead. Michael is last seen on camera at 11:27 p.m., walking in the direction of the beach. Michael loved the water. He enjoyed swimming and water sports. His love of the water seemed to increase when he was drinking with family members, reporting multiple stories of Michael swimming in the ocean at night while intoxicated. This opened up the possibility that Michael had gone for a swim, been pulled out by a strong current, and drowned. However, Michael had left his clothes and personal effects on the beach in his other instances of dangerous night swimming. Nothing belonging to Michael was found by the water after he went missing. Michael's brother, Tyler, made the decision in late 2016 to move from Baltimore to California so that he could be a part of Michael's children's lives. Michael's family's hopes that one day, if Michael is not alive to rejoin his family, they can still discover what happened to him on that night in March. Brenda Jackson was an Army veteran who served a tour in Iraq. Unfortunately, she also faced violence on the home front. In August 2015, her 6 children were removed from her custody after domestic violence incident with her husband, Antonio Jackson. There was such an extensive history of domestic violence in Brenda's marriage that when she failed to press charges against Antonio, the courts viewed their home as unsafe for the children. Brenda's oldest child was sent to live with their father, Brenda's first husband, in Texas, and the remaining 5 children replaced with Brenda's parents. Brenda was allowed supervised visits with the children. The separation from her children spurred Brenda to action. She separated from Antonio and eventually filed for divorce to show that she could provide her kids with a safe environment. In January 2016, she was living on her own in Park Forest, Illinois. Around 9 p.m. on January 3rd, Brenda's father dropped her off at her home on Arcadia Street. At approximately 10:30 that night, Brenda spoke on the phone with her mother. This will be the last known contact with Brenda. Brenda did not show up for work as a food service worker at Rich South High School the following morning. On January 5th, Brenda's mother and estranged husband reported her missing to the police. Inside her home, police found Brenda's purse, identification, and coat. The temperature in the area at that time consistently was barely above freezing, so it is unlikely that Brenda left home willingly without her jacket. 8 days after Brenda went missing, her mother received a phone call stating that she could find Brenda at a forest preserve not far from her home. A search was organized but found no sign of her. There were reports of sightings of Brenda in nearby Chicago shortly after she disappeared, but they were never verified. 3 weeks after Brenda vanished, her children were removed from their grandparents' home and placed in foster homes. The Department of Children and Family Services made this decision after learning that Brenda's parents allowed the children's father, Antonio, to have supervised visits with his children. According to the department, this was a violation of the safety plan set in place for the children, and Brenda's parents did not fully understand the dangers of allowing such visits. According to an unconfirmed account from a family friend, Brenda's family only allowed these visits because they suspected him of playing a role in Brenda's disappearance and hoped that by seeing Antonio regularly they could discover information about Brenda's case. While Brenda's father hopes that his daughter is still alive, her mother believes that she met with foul play. It would be too out of character for her daughter, who loved her children and never walked away from a challenge, to have simply run away and start a new life. She still hopes that she will find closure in Brenda's case so that she can give answers to her grandchildren. Thomas Messick Sr. served in the United States Army as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division. He married his wife Beverly in 1959 and lived in Brunswick, New York. On November 15, 2015, he embarked on an annual hunting trip with 6 of his friends in the Adirondack Mountains. The group entered the Lake George Wild Forest near Lily Pond Road. Thomas was last seen around 10 a.m. The other hunters with him had planned to stalk deer and lead them back towards Thomas and another hunter so that Thomas would not have to cover a large distance. The group was supposed to meet at a designated location at a designated time that afternoon. Thomas did not make it to the meetup. The hunting party alerted forest rangers, and they searched for Thomas from 4:30 in the afternoon until midnight. They were unsuccessful in finding Thomas or any of his belongings. While this hunting party had made this trip for 55 years, this was the first year they had gone to this particular location to hunt, so Thomas was not as familiar with the area as he was with his own hunting camp where the trip usually took place. Thomas had lost one of his eyes in his early 20s due to an accident, so his vision was limited. He had almost skipped the outing in 2015 because he had just finished recovering from shingles. He also had a history of cardiac problems. This led to an early theory that Thomas had begun having a medical emergency and started walking for help before collapsing somewhere out of view. However, Thomas could not have made it very far in such condition. If this scenario did occur, either he or his body should have been discovered relatively quickly. The immediate area where he was last seen was searched thoroughly, and rangers spent 2 months searching outlying areas. Almost 300 trained searchers combed the area for Thomas a week after he went missing. Aerial searches of the area were also performed. Canine units, the FBI Quick Response Team, the Warren Sheriff's Office, and many other agencies also helped in the search. Despite these extensive and expert efforts, no sign of Thomas was ever discovered anywhere in the woods. His fate remains a mystery. Margaret Haddigan had a fiery spirit. Independent and willful as a child, she surprisingly thrived in grueling but structured environments as an adult. She served as a volunteer firefighter in Warren Township, New Jersey. In February 2001, she left her young daughter with her parents so that she could enlist in the United States Army. She served for 2 years before requiring a medical discharge. Upon returning to New Jersey, Margaret resumed firefighting and through it met Tim McEnroe, who would become her husband and the father of Margaret's 2 youngest daughters. Margaret's intense personality posed challenges in her marriage, however. She and her husband were known to have intense arguments. On October 9, 2006, they got into an argument so severe that police were called to their home for domestic disturbance. By the time they arrived at the home, Margaret had left to go to her parents' home to calm down. She returned home later that night. The following day, October 10th, Margaret called Tim midday to ask him to pick up baby formula with a 5-month-old daughter. He stopped at home around 1:30 p.m. to drop it off and then left to continue working the landscaping job he was at that day. This would be the last time anyone saw Margaret. When Tim returned home at 3 p.m., Margaret was not there. The couple's infant daughter was left at the house alone in her crib. Tim did not report his wife missing until October 12th. Police investigated every imaginable scenario that may result in a person going missing. Frustratingly, all of them have clues that make them possible, and all of them have clues that rule them out in this case. Could Margaret have run off to start a new life? She was known to go off to cool down after getting into confrontations. She had even gone off for several days a few times in her past. The only things that Margaret's husband reported missing from their home were a black duffel bag and a large amount of cash. He has not been consistent in reporting exactly how much cash, but it could have been up to $11,000. Margaret's friends and family argue that this scenario is impossible because of how fiercely protective Margaret was of her children. She had not run away since becoming a mother, and she certainly would not have left her infant daughter alone in her house. While Margaret was dedicated to all of her children, her youngest daughter had been born prematurely and required extra medical care. Margaret would not let her out of her sight for most of her young life, so it is almost inconceivable that she would have left her all alone. The theory that Margaret met with foul play also has holes in it. There was no sign of forced entry or any indication of a struggle inside of her home. Margaret was trained in martial arts and learned self-defense in the army. Her personality was such that she would fight if she were under attack, and her skill set would have given her a good chance at winning. Even if someone did overpower her, things should have been knocked out of place in the fight she would have put up. If she did meet with foul play, it was most likely at the hands of someone she trusted, who she would have willingly led into the house and not had her guard up around. On Thanksgiving Day, roughly 6 weeks after Margaret vanished, police located an army t-shirt a mile away from Margaret's home. Tim identified it as belonging to his wife. Forensic examination of the shirt did not provide any helpful information to the last piece of physical evidence recovered in the case. In February 2011, the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office named Tim McEnroe as a person of interest in his wife's disappearance. This was due to Tim's perceived lack of complete cooperation with authorities and details on his account of the day Margaret went missing changing over time. He has never been charged in relation to the case. Margaret's oldest daughter, Sarah, who turned 21 in 2018, is a member of the United States Marine Corps and, like her mother, has served as a volunteer firefighter. Margaret's father passed away in February 2013. Margaret's mother, Eileen, lights a candle for Margaret every week in the prayer garden at Our Lady of the Mount Catholic Church and holds a prayer service every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. Lonnie Green was a veteran of the United States Navy. In February 2014, he was living in the borough of Bellevue, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. On December 4th of that year, 60-year-old Lonnie was spending the afternoon at the home of his brother, Benny, in the Hill District of Pittsburgh. Lonnie had been watching television when he suddenly stood up and told Benny that he would be back in 20 minutes. Benny did not press him for details as to where he was going. Lonnie left his brother's home but did not return within 20 minutes. He has not been seen since. Lonnie's social security, bank account, and cell phone have not been used since he went missing. While he did have previous substance abuse problems, he was sober at the time he went missing. His family says he showed no signs of relapsing. Lonnie's family has been actively Greater Pittsburgh area. Unfortunately, they do not have the financial resources to hire a private investigator or offer a reward to help generate leads in the case. Since Lonnie's finances were not utilized after the last time he was seen, his rent was obviously not paid. His landlord was understanding about the situation, but in February, Lonnie's family packed up all of his belongings and moved him out of his home. He remains missing, and there are a few leads in the case. The case of Shannon, Christian, and Christopher Newsom, the tragic end of 2 college students. Have you ever heard the saying that hesitation is akin to death? In our story today, this takes on a literal meaning, as the negligent delay by police officers cost the lives of 2 young people. During the subsequent legal proceedings, it was repeatedly stated that the officers followed protocol and waited 24 hours from the time of the missing persons report. However, it was during these critical hours that the couple endured a tragic end under extreme cruelty. The case of Shaman Christian and Christopher Newsom is cited as one of the most notorious and brutal in the history of the United States. It shook the nation twice. First in February 2007 when the crimes occurred, and later in 2011 when the sentences handed down to the gang members were challenged and appealed. This complicated legal battle led to the enactment of 2 laws. These laws restrict attorneys and defendants from casting the victims in a negative light and abolish the requirement for a jury's unanimous verdict to be approved by a judge. In this harrowing tale, There were 2 innocent victims and 5 merciless criminals, with the motive for the heinous act being a simple robbery. Let's delve into the details of this tragedy, piece together the chronology of those horrific events, understand the role of each participant, and explore whether this tragedy could have been avoided and the young lives saved. Who were Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom? Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., commonly known as Chris, was born on September 21, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Mary and Hugh Newsom in a loving, large family. As the youngest child, he was adored by his family. Chris was athletic in his youth, particularly excelling in baseball during his school years. His coach believed he had a bright future in the sport, but a severe injury and a prolonged recovery process ended his promising athletic career. Nevertheless, Chris was a man of many talents. He was an excellent artist, played guitar, had woodworking skills, and was knowledgeable about cars and motorcycles. Dreaming of becoming a mechanic in his youth, Chris's passion for carpentry eventually took precedence. After high school, he attended the prestigious University of Tennessee, where he was a diligent student and ranked among the top of his class. Shamangale Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in the Cogdokes, Texas, the younger of 2 children to Dina and Gary Christian. She was raised alongside her older brother, Chase, with whom she shared a close and affectionate bond. Notably, Dina had been diagnosed with infertility in her youth, and the birth of her 2 children was considered nothing short of miraculous. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the children attended local schools, and the parents established a small but profitable family business. Dina conducted individual psychotherapy sessions at home. Shannon, sharing her mother's interest in psychology, was outgoing and kind-hearted. After high school, she pursued a degree in sociology at the University of Tennessee and worked part-time to save for her dream of buying a car. Her parents and brother helped her realize this dream on her 20th birthday, contributing towards the purchase of a silver Toyota 4Runner. It was on the university campus in February 2006 that Christopher and Shannon met through mutual friends. She was just 21, and he was about to turn 23. It was love at first sight, and the couple became inseparable. Within a month, Chris introduced Shannon to his parents, expressing his desire to spend his future with her. Shannon reciprocated by introducing Chris to her family, who warmly welcomed him. In October 2006, a significant family dinner was held, attended by both their parents and siblings. Discussions revolved around the young couple's deep feelings and their plans to marry after graduating from university. Everyone was happy and full of hope for the future, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that would soon befall their families. Vanished on the way to a party. On January 6, 2007, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom were invited to a birthday party of a mutual friend. That Saturday, Shannon visited a beauty salon to prepare for the celebration, parking her car in a nearby underground garage where they planned to meet. However, Chris was delayed, leading to a slight argument between them as they were running late for the event. Their friends became increasingly worried when Shannon and Chris did not show up at the party. Known for their responsibility, it was unlike them to miss an event without notifying anyone. Attempts to reach them on their phones were unsuccessful. In desperation, Shannon's best friend repeatedly called her mother late into the night to check if everything was all right, but received no answer. The next morning, Dina, Shannon's mother, realized that her daughter had not come home. Initially, she was not overly concerned, assuming Shannon might have stayed over at Chris's place after the party. Besides, Shannon had a work shift on Sunday, so it was plausible she went straight to work from Chris's place. However, Dina's concern grew when she noticed several missed calls from an unknown number around midnight. Returning the call, she heard Shannon's friend's voice, informing her that Shannon and Chris had not shown up at the birthday party and were unreachable. This instilled fear in Dina, sensing that something terrible might have happened to her daughter and her boyfriend. Neither Shannon nor Chris was answering their phones, and Chris's parents were equally surprised, believing he was staying at Shannon's place. Further anxiety arose when it was discovered Shannon had not shown up for work either. The worried parents immediately contacted the police, but the response was lackluster. The officer suggested the couple might have simply sought some alone time and lost track of it. They also followed the protocol that an adult is considered missing only after 24 hours without contact. But for Shannon and Chris, those 24 hours were critical. Not willing to wait, the parents and friends of the young couple began their own search. They contacted everyone they knew, visited hospitals, distributed flyers with their photos, and set up social media groups appealing for any information about the missing students. Despite their efforts, no useful information surfaced. The last known sighting of Shannon was at the beauty salon she visited on Saturday. According to the hairstylist who attended her, Shannon only talked about the upcoming party and had no plans to stop anywhere else on the way. A gruesome discovery along the railroad tracks. It wasn't until Monday, January 8th, that the police finally began their search for the missing young couple, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. By this time, thanks to the efforts of their parents and friends, almost the entire city was aware of their disappearance. The day before, on Sunday, there were rumors about a horrifying discovery near the railroad tracks, but no concrete information was available. A railroad worker inspecting the tracks in his assigned area stumbled upon what appeared to be severely damaged human remains on the embankment alongside the tracks. The body was in a horrific state with multiple injuries and had been doused with a flammable liquid in an attempt to burn it. The police, responding to the scene, cordoned off the area and conducted a thorough examination. However, they were unable to find any significant clues or leads. After taking necessary photographs, the remains were sent to the morgue for an autopsy to determine the cause of death and to attempt identification, though it was clear that the extensive damage and effects of the fire would make this difficult. Forensic experts determined that the body belonged to a young man who had suffered a brutal death. The victim had multiple injuries inflicted while he was alive, indicating prolonged and severe assault. Almost all of his teeth had been knocked out or damaged by blows. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the back in a final fatal shot to the head. Additionally, traces of seminal fluid from at least 3 different men were found in his body along with distinctive tears, suggesting repeated violent assaults. When police checked recent reports of missing young men, Christopher Newsom fit the description in age, height, and build. The officers contacted his parents and requested DNA samples for confirmation, but strongly advised against personal identification at the morgue as the burnt remains barely resembled human features. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis confirmed that the body belonged to the missing student, Newsom. The search for Shannon. Despite the distressing news about Christopher, Shannon Christian's parents still clung to the hope that their daughter was alive, possibly being held somewhere. Her mobile phone was last pinged on the day the couple disappeared in one of Knoxville's more troubled neighborhoods, a place they wouldn't have visited by choice. This indicated that they were likely brought there against their will, and Shannon might still be held in the area. In a secluded alley of this neighborhood, Shannon's Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned. It was in a terrible state, so much so that Dina and Gary Christian hardly recognized their daughter's car. The SUV was dirty, scratched, with broken headlights and deflated tires. All of Shannon's personal belongings were missing from the car, which was littered with cigarette butts, and the seats were torn and stained. The driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that a large adult male had been the last one to drive it. A crumpled envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found on the floor between the seats, likely dropped by the perpetrator. A local witness reported seeing 4 African-American males driving the SUV that Saturday evening, a vehicle that stood out in that area. Fingerprints on the envelope led the police to Lamarcus Davidson, previously convicted for serious offenses. His residence, located in an industrial area near a wasteland, lacked witnesses. When no one responded to the police's knock and offer to surrender, they forced entry, hoping to find Shannon alive inside. Inside the house, they found Shannon's purse, a stuffed toy from her car, as well as Christopher's headphones and baseball cap, a knife with blood traces torn and blood-stained fragments of women's clothing, and Shannon's lifeless body were discovered in the house's trash chute system hidden under dirty sheets. She was bound in the fetal position and wrapped in 5 trash bags. Experts later concluded that she likely passed away in the early hours of Monday, January 8th. This tragic finding suggested that if the police had begun their search immediately after the missing persons report, rather than waiting for 24 hours, Shannon might have been saved. A horrific state of suffering. The condition of Shannon Christian's body was a horrifying sight even for seasoned forensic experts, as there was not a single untouched area on her. Shannon was covered from head to toe with bruises, abrasions, cuts, and cigarette burns. The numerous tears and injuries to her genital area, as well as her oral cavity and throat, indicated that she had been subjected to multiple assaults by several men. Shannon sustained a serious head injury and internal bleeding in the abdominal area, likely resulting from being kicked. Furthermore, the merciless assailants inflicted several penetrating, though not fatal, stab wounds on her and extinguished dozens of cigarettes on her skin. In a brutal attempt to destroy DNA evidence on her body, the perpetrators doused her with household bleach, paying particular attention to bleeding wounds and her genital area. She was also forcibly made to ingest bleach. After these torturous acts, Shannon, still alive, was wrapped in 5 trash bags and then shoved into a household trash chute covered with sheets and rags. She slowly suffocated and bled to death, helplessly trapped with no chance of escape or calling for help. 5 merciless perpetrators. Lamarcus Davidson, in whose house the mutilated body of Shaman Christian and personal belongings of the deceased Christopher Newsom were found, was immediately declared a fugitive. The police also tracked down another suspect, Eric Boyd, whose traces were found at the crime scene. Boyd was apprehended on January 11th without resistance and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, claiming he wouldn't go to prison for crimes he didn't commit. Boyd revealed that Davidson was hiding in a vacant house listed for sale and personally led the police to the location. Davidson, unprepared for this turn of events, was caught off guard and offered no resistance. Notably, at the time of his arrest, Davidson was wearing sneakers that had belonged to the deceased student. During interrogations, Davidson tried to minimize his role, portraying himself as a victim. He claimed that the couple had come to his house looking to buy banned substances, but were caught up in a conflict with his acquaintances. Davidson insisted that he left to avoid involvement, and the subsequent brutal acts occurred in his absence. Further interrogations revealed 3 more individuals involved in the case. Davidson's friend, George Thomas, his half-brother, Latalvis Cobins, and an 18-year-old woman named Vanessa Lynn Coleman. Once all 5 suspects were in custody, they were placed in separate cells and interrogated individually. Each tried to deflect blame onto the others, inadvertently revealing details of the heinous crime. Their fragmented accounts helped piece together the event's chronology and each perpetrator's role in the brutal act. A timeline of tragic events. Lamarcus Davidson, who had been released from prison on parole just a few months before these events, was desperately in need of money. He was involved in the sale of banned substances and urgently required a vehicle to deliver these to his customers. Davidson decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot known for its lack of surveillance cameras and headed there with his accomplices. Tragically, at that moment, students Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot arguing over Chris's delay. The criminals, deciding to leave no witnesses, forced the couple into the trunk of a car at gunpoint. The pair was taken to Davidson's house where they were brutally beaten and repeatedly assaulted. After midnight, a barefoot and undressed Christopher was again forced into the trunk and taken to the railroad tracks. He was ordered to walk on the stones before being shot twice in the back. His torment was ended with a final shot to the head. His body was then doused with a flammable liquid and set on fire in hopes of destroying any evidence that could lead to the perpetrators. Having dealt with Newsom, the criminals returned to the house where Shannon remained bound. She endured horrific cruelty the next day, leaving her without a single uninjured area on her body. The sadists concluded their torture by dousing her with bleach and packing her still alive into plastic trash bags where she slowly suffocated. The exact moment when young Vanessa Coleman joined the group was unclear. During interrogations, she claimed to be a hostage herself, participating in the torture out of fear for her life. However, Boyd indicated that Coleman was Davidson's girlfriend and willingly participated in the events, even taking some of Shannon's jewelry and mobile phone. Further, a personal diary found at Vanessa's home contained her descriptions of the horrors at her boyfriend's house, which she referred to as an exciting adventure. The initial trials and sentences. During the investigation, it was established that Lamarcus Davidson, born in 1981, was the leader of the criminal group and the primary instigator of the brutal acts against the innocent victims. Davidson tried to deflect blame and downplay his role in the atrocities, attempting to shift responsibility onto the deceased themselves. Davidson claimed that the couple came to his house to buy banned substances and later suggested engaging in rough intimacy with him and his friends, a situation he said spiraled out of control. Remarkably, the defendant's lawyers latched on to this version, attempting to tarnish the reputations of the deceased in court. The parents of the victims later expressed immense emotional anguish over these claims. Nevertheless, Davidson was found guilty on 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and particularly cruel and premeditated termination of life, among others. The jury unanimously decided that Davidson deserved the death penalty for his heinous acts. Latalvis Cobbins, born in 1982, faced the death penalty for his role in the torture, assaults, and involvement in the termination of life. However, he was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. George Thomas, born in 1983, received a similar life sentence for his involvement in the same crimes with no chance of release. Eric Boyd, considering his cooperation with the investigation and assistance in capturing Davidson, was sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment. The relatives of both victims found this sentence outrageously lenient. As for Vanessa Coleman, born in 1988, the only female participant in the atrocities, the investigation proved her involvement in the torture, assaults, and in Shannon's tragic end. She was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Overturned verdicts and new hearings in 2011 while the criminals were serving their sentences and Davidson awaited execution. The case took an unexpected turn. The presiding judge resigned, admitting to a substance dependency. His ability to conduct trials was questioned, and his verdicts over the last 2 years were annulled, leading to new hearings, including the case of Christian and Newsom. A new judge scheduled hearings for all 5 individuals involved in the student's tragic end. After the retrials, Davidson's sentence remained unchanged, death penalty. Cobbins continued to serve his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Thomas, however, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa Coleman's sentence was reduced from the original 53 years to 35 years. Her appeal in 2014 was rejected, and parole was denied in 2017. In 2020, the parole board decided she would remain incarcerated at least until April 2032. Eric Boyd's situation changed most dramatically. Originally receiving a relatively short sentence for cooperating with the investigation, his involvement in the assaults and tragic end of both victims was later proven. His retrial resulted in a life sentence without parole, with his accomplice, Thomas, testifying against him, revealing previously unknown details about Boyd's role. For his testimony, Thomas, who initially had the possibility of parole after 51 years, had his sentence reduced by 15%, contingent on good behavior. Boyd's attempts to appeal his new sentence were unsuccessful. He is currently serving his sentence in the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Davidson remains in the maximum security Riverbend institution, awaiting the execution of his death sentence. Public reaction and the case's impact. As previously mentioned, this trial garnered significant attention widely covered in the press and leading to the enactment of 2 laws. The first was aimed at protecting victims from defamation, attempts to shift blame onto them, and portraying them negatively. This was in response to the defense strategy of the accused and their lawyers who tried to label the students as drug users and thrill seekers in a troubled neighborhood. These claims were completely false and caused immense pain and suffering to the victims' families. The second law eliminated the need for a judge's signature on a jury's unanimous verdict, which, if in place during this case, could have prevented the need for retrials and sentence reviews. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, which became a torture chamber for the young couple, was demolished in the February. A memorial was erected on the site in honor of Shaman Christian and Christopher Newsom. In memory of Christian, a golf tournament and a Christian charity foundation were established, providing support to victims of violence. Similarly, a foundation in Newsom's name was created, holding annual memorial baseball tournaments at Halls Park and awarding a scholarship named after the deceased student and former baseball player. It's important to note that despite the public outcry and widespread attention, the media initially misrepresented details of the case, either accidentally or intentionally. Many believe that the variations in reporting and delayed coverage were influenced by racial motives, as the victims were white and the perpetrators were African American. However, the head of the Association of Criminal Writers and Editors noted, "I can't confidently say that this case would have received more attention if 5 white criminals had been accused of committing similar atrocities against 2 black individuals." Additionally, the Knoxville police chief stated that there was no evidence to suggest these crimes were committed based on racial animosity. The case of Lauren Stewart. Lauren Stewart, a 45-year-old woman, seemed to live a life of perfection. She was a devoted wife to Dan, a caring mother to her adult children, Stephen and Bethany, and it appeared that she had been blessed by fate. However, in the weeks leading up to her unimaginable act, she ventured into a dark world, exploring disturbing content on YouTube and researching methods to end her own life, eventually becoming skilled in the use of a Glock handgun. Lauren Devine. Stewart was born on January 9, 1973, and she spent most of her life in Michigan. Her work history included part-time personal training at the YMCA in Farmington Hills and occasional house cleaning. After leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses, she had pursued modeling and acting, exploring her creative side through workshops and networking with photographers. She was regarded as a charming and very pleasant woman. Lauren was married to a man named Daniel Stewart, who worked at the University of Michigan as a leading software architect dedicated to developing technology for predicting heart attacks. He had many years of experience as a code developer in the technology industry. Together with his wife, they were devout Christians within the Jehovah's Witness denomination for an extended period until 2013, when they decided to explore and take a different approach to their spiritual life. The couple had 2 accomplished children, 27-year-old Stephen, a data solution architect, and 24-year-old Bethany, a computer whiz who showcased her talents in art and graphic design. At 45, Lauren Stewart had it all: a flourishing husband, 2 educated children, a budding modeling career, and a charming Keogh Harbor home adorned with a welcoming heart wreath on the door. However, beneath this facade of perfection, she grappled with a hidden pain. Lauren had experienced the heartache of exclusion and rejection from the religion she and her husband Daniel had embraced just a few years earlier. Lauren and her husband decided to leave the Jehovah's Witness faith, a Christian denomination known for its strict indoctrination and the practice of shunning former members. The seemingly perfect exterior concealed a complex web of emotions and decisions that would soon unfold into a captivating narrative. Up until 2013, Lauren and her family had been devout Jehovah's Witnesses, strictly adhering to beliefs that eschewed celebrations like birthdays, Easter, Christmas, or any other event they believed contradicted the teachings of Christ. Additionally, their faith strongly discouraged higher education, putting Stephen and Bethany at risk of being excommunicated if they pursued college. However, Dan envisioned a brighter future for their children through higher education. When they sought approval from the church elders to allow their kids to pursue degrees, the response was firm: disobey the church's policies and face disfellowship. This threat weighed heavily on the steward, as almost everyone they knew, including their extended family, were part of the congregation. According to the church's rules, excommunication would mean complete isolation even from their own flesh and blood. After careful consideration, the steward made a bold decision to leave the religion they had long embraced. Although it initially felt right, the community's disapproval became unbearable, especially for Lauren. She described how routine tasks like grocery shopping were marred by dirty looks and hurtful comments from people she once believed were her friends, even though the belittling remarks were not directed at her. Living in a small community of just 3,300 residents, many of whom were Jehovah's Witnesses, the Stewarts struggled with the reality that the church-approved members would constantly remind them of their outcast status whenever they had the chance. This emotional burden became too much to bear, leading to a breaking point. And in search of a lifeline, Lauren turned to the gym, making it a regular part of her life to rebuild her physical and mental well-being. Her remarkable transformation allowed her to secure a job as a fitness instructor, and she was even able to leverage her natural beauty to become a successful model, surprising those who crossed her path. During this period, Laura seemed pleasant and optimistic despite her church's rejection. However, beneath her confident facade, she was deeply and immensely suffering from chronic depression, an affliction that had plagued her even before the shunning intensified with each passing day. In a desperate attempt to mask her inner turmoil, she would occasionally let glimpses of her distress show through, only to quickly conceal them with a forced smile. One of Laura's most closely guarded secrets was the family's crippling debt, which was pushing them to the brink of ruin. Confronted with this dual onslaught of financial and emotional distress, she devised a plan to resolve all her problems at once. Haunted by her inner turmoil, Lauren Stewart's downward spiral was deeply chilling and heartbreaking. She delved into grim research, scouring YouTube for methods of ending her own life, and instructional videos on handling a handgun, all leading up to a fateful day on February 15, 2018. She left a poignant note on the dinner table, meticulously tidied the home, and texted her loved ones as well as her husband's boss just before the unthinkable act. At 9:24 a.m., she turned over all the family photos on a secretary desk and sent a message to her husband's boss stating that Dan had an accident and died. The boss reached out for further details, but received no response. Hours later, at 5:07 p.m. on the same day, she reached out to her cousin, confessing that she had become evil. She stated that she had taken her husband and kids with her, so they would not have to feel the impact of her selfish act, and that they would sleep until Christ resurrects them. Her cousin responded, urging her not to proceed with her plan. Lauren had become increasingly detached from reality in recent months, unbeknownst to her family. She had a pistol in her possession and had tragically decided to use it against the very people she professed to love. Her first victim was her husband, 47-year-old Dan, whom she shot in the head as he attempted to flee. With her most significant threat eliminated, she went upstairs to her 24-year-old daughter Bethany's room, where Bethany was asleep, and ended her daughter's life without hesitation. Next, her son Stephen, who lived in his own place across town, unknowingly arrived at the family home lured by false pretenses. With his back turned, unaware of the imminent danger, Lauren, the mother he loved, shot him at point-blank range. The horrifying scene didn't end there, as Lauren took the life of the family dog, placing its body in the bathtub. A neighbor had heard these shots, but assumed someone was slamming doors. The house became a chilling temporary morgue, and Lauren meticulously tidied up. The darkness culminated as Lauren turned the gun on herself using a method she had researched online. The cousin who Lauren had texted tried texting her back, but Lauren never responded. The next morning, on February 16th, the cousin went over to her house with a friend, and when they received no response at the door, they contacted the police for a check. When the police arrived at the house that morning, the kitchen was organized, the refrigerator was stocked, and handwritten labels were on various items with a calendar hanging on the refrigerator. Their discovery began with the family dog in the bathtub, triggering a chilling from the officers who feared there was an active shooter. They found Stephen Stewart on the floor, believed to have been shot while seated on a chair in another room. Bethany lay lifeless, shot in her sleep with a pillow, muffling the sound. Dan Stewart was discovered on the basement floor in front of a couch, his right hand still in his jeans pocket. The slightly pulled white pocket liner on his left pocket suggested he was standing when he was shot and attempted to react, thus pulling the pocket liner. Upstairs, Lauren was discovered at the base of the stairs, a pistol by her side, her self-inflicted wound between the eyes, echoing her online research. 2 notes were found on the dinner table. One was for the medical examiner, while the other, a chilling suicide note, exposed Lauren's inner turmoil. She wrote, "I allowed evil into my heart when I chose not to accept God's free love, and it made me sick inside. I killed my family because I know my death would stumble them. At least now they will not suffer and will be resurrected to life forever in peace." As the police investigated the Stewarts' lives, a complex and puzzling picture began to emerge. Interviews with family, friends, and neighbors described the couple as reclusive with a sense of estrangement after leaving the Jehovah's Witness church. Lauren's past was marked by her own personal challenges, and some family members said she suffered from depression, which was further exacerbated by the demands of motherhood. In recent years, she became increasingly fixated on religion, often engaging in impassioned outbursts. Her family members, including her father and sister, revealed the extent of the emotional distance that had grown over time, and they had not spoken to her in years. Her mother had passed away when she was 13 years old. Estranged for years, they saw Dan as the catalyst pulling Lauren away from them and never really cared about him. They also shared troubling insights about the couple's mental health, characterizing their relationship as a fusion of mutual distress. To those who knew Lauren, her defiance of the Jehovah's Witness faith marked her as an apostate, a label that spoke to her outspoken opposition to the organization and her decision to leave it. The heart-wrenching tragedy left a deep scar on the lives of those who knew the family intimately. Joyce Taylor, a longtime family friend, was visibly shaken, believing that the murders were a direct consequence of the Stewarts' rejection by the Jehovah's Witnesses. Taylor and other former members shed light on the harsh reality of leaving the faith. They explained that once you depart from the church, even your own family members who remain within its fold are forbidden from interacting with you. A severe form of shunning that takes a heavy emotional toll. According to Taylor, Lauren and Daniel's desire to provide their children with a college education clashed head-on with the religion's teachings, which frowned upon such pursuits. The collision between their aspirations and the rigid doctrines of their faith set the stage for a tragic unraveling. They were shunned everywhere and every way possible. As Taylor said, if Lauren went to the grocery store, they didn't look her in the eye. When you're raised a Jehovah's Witness, they choose your friends. They choose who you associate with. And if you go against that, they will disfellowship you or shun you. In a shocking turn of events, Joyce Taylor stormed into a Kingdom Hall meeting in Union Lake, seizing the moment to confront the congregation. Standing on a chair, she boldly criticized the gathering, her voice resonating with a mix of anger and sorrow. "Excuse me, everyone," she declared. "My name is Joyce Taylor. 2 days ago, 4 people died as a result of your shunning process." Taylor's outburst sent shock waves through the room as she pushed away congregants and vented her pent-up frustration, shouting, "5 years ago, you people pulled your support from this small family. The only support they had was you people. You turned them away and you shunned them. And for what?" she exclaimed. "Because they wanted to raise their children as they saw fit." The police were aware of the family's issues with their former church, but declined to comment. Police records detailed how Lauren had recorded a poignant 2-minute video on February 6th at 11 p.m., explaining the depths of her despair. She cited a multitude of issues, expressing her inability to carry on and her desire not to burden others any longer. Abandoned by her church family, Lauren found herself drowning in a relentless sea of despair with what she believed to be the only escape: death. Convinced that ending her own life was the solution to her unbearable suffering, she made the agonizing choice to also take the lives of her loved ones, sparing them what she perceived as the inevitable shame and suffering that her actions would bring upon their household. Police records painted a grim picture of Lauren's mental state in the lead-up to the tragedy, noting her unmistakable signs of severe depression and increasingly abnormal behavior. It appeared that she had immersed herself in a personal interpretation of religion, intensifying her depression. Shockingly, she never sought professional help or counseling, and no prescription drugs or alcohol were found in her system. However, traces of marijuana were discovered not just in Lauren's system, but also in her husband and sons. The police investigation unraveled a complex web of factors contributing to her devastating actions. Loneliness, the severed ties with family and friends over religious differences, and deep-seated emotional scars stemming from alleged childhood sexual abuse, all converging to amplify her anguish and ultimately driving her to commit the unthinkable. In a striking testament to the estrangement within the family, Lauren's sister's response spoke volumes. She exhibited a somber demeanor and expressed a surprising lack of surprise when hearing the news of her sister's actions, demonstrating just how far Lauren had drifted from her own sister, who even showed little regret about the tragedy. While the motives behind Lauren Stewart's horrifying actions may have been due to the profound isolation imposed by her former church and her childhood trauma, it begs the question, could things have taken a different turn had she reached out for help when she felt suffocated by her circumstances? Tragically, rather than seeking counseling or professional guidance, Lauren chose a path of self-destruction with devastating consequences for all involved. As we reflect on this heartbreaking tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind. Oscoda is a small town in northeast Michigan that lies along Lake Huron. On Halloween of 1969, the local high school was set to have its homecoming football game. The game briefly had to be evacuated due to a bomb threat. No bomb was found and no one was hurt. Unfortunately, that incident would not prove to be the biggest story of the night. That night, the three youngest daughters in the Hovley family returned home after trick-or-treating with their mother. Their oldest sister Pamela had plans to go to the homecoming game at the high school and then meet her boyfriend at a Halloween party. Pamela was not home and there was no sign that she had been home while her family had been out trick-or-treating. As the night went on, Pamela's mother began to worry. Pamela's boyfriend told them that she had never shown up to meet him at the party. As Pamela's worried mother began to call around to try to locate her 15-year-old daughter, she learned that she was not the only concerned parent in town that night. 16-year-old Patricia Spencer was also missing. Pamela and Patricia attended the same school and were acquaintances, but they were not known to be close friends or to spend time together alone. However, for some reason, they skipped part of school together on the day of Halloween. They were seen walking along River Road together and then seemed to disappear into thin air. The ongoing investigation into the girls' disappearance has been hampered by the fact that it was not taken seriously when it occurred. Authorities dismissed Patty and Pam as runaways and failed to follow up on potential leads. In February, a man reported to police that he had picked up the two girls along River Road the day they went missing and dropped them off at a gas station near the intersection of River Road and Route 23. This made him the last known person to see them. When asked why he did not report this in 1969, he told the police that he had. The man had come forward and been interviewed by the police on November 1st, the day after the girls went missing. Officers working on the case did not bother to even report the man's existence in the case's file. It is impossible to know how many other leads may have been received but ignored. While both girls had a reputation for partying, they had no reason to leave their home. Despite her young age, Pamela had recently become engaged to her boyfriend, so she had every reason to stay in Oscoda. Pamela's sister, Mary, is adamant that her sister and Patricia were picked up by the wrong person on Halloween of 1969 and met with foul play. She's also adamant that if the police had done their job correctly, both families would know what happened to their missing girls. Mary continues to return to her hometown every few months to hang new flyers, bearing her sister's image and asking for information. 30-year-old Sylvia Salinas owned a small grocery store at the intersection of 30, 1st Street and Avenue Q in Galveston, Texas. On October 31st, 1989, a silent alarm in the store triggered a phone call to 911. Police responded within minutes. Upon entering the small store, they saw bloody footprints on the floor. Behind the counter was Sylvia's body. Her killer was already gone. Sylvia had been stabbed in the heart with a large knife. The killer then used the murder weapon to pry open the cash register and steal all the cash out of it. This was what had set off the silent alarm. While the motive for the crime appears to be robbery, authorities believe that Sylvia knew her killer. She had no defensive wounds. She kept a gun and a machete behind the register to protect herself, but made no effort to grab for either of them. Her killer was able to get close enough to stab her without scaring her. According to her family, Sylvia would not let anyone behind the counter unless she knew them well and trusted them. After the murder, approximately 20 different men were interviewed and provided statements and fingerprints to the police. They were all cleared. In February 2008, Hurricane Ike destroyed all the stored evidence in Sylvia's case, except for a videotape taken at the scene. Luckily, fingerprints taken at the time of the murder were entered into a database and are available for comparison. In February 2018, Galveston police announced plans to resubmit them. For now, Sylvia's case still remains unsolved. Doris and Alan Sorensen lived in Windsor, a small town in northern Colorado. The couple ran a jewelry store on Main Street. Doris, 66, ran the counter of the store, while her husband, Alan, 79, mainly did repairs and engraving. On November 5, 1984, a friend of the Sorensens called the police out of concern for their safety. Neither of the Sorensens had been seen or heard from since Halloween, and newspapers were piling up at their front door. Police Chief John Michaels, the town's main investigator, took the call and agreed to go out to the Sorensen home. He was able to gain entry to the house through the back garage door. At 10:45 a.m., he discovered the bodies of Doris and Alan inside their brick home. The couple's beloved dog had also been killed. Chief Michaels found Doris in an upstairs bedroom and Alan was found downstairs. They had both been bound and strangled. Authorities determined that Alan and Doris had been killed on Halloween, the day they had last been seen. While the Sorensens were pleasant people who were kind and welcoming to others, they were also very private people. They interacted with the public only at their store, not attending parties or community functions. They left their house dark every Halloween to let trick-or-treaters know not to come to their house. This unfortunately meant that no one was near their home on the night of Halloween, giving the couple's killer the opportunity to not be detected. A year prior to their deaths, potentially down to the day, Alan and Doris were the victims of a burglary. Either late at night on October 30th or in the early hours of October 31st, 1983, a hole was cut in the roof of the Sorensen jewelry store. Thieves stole over $27,000 worth of gold and loose jewels. The vast majority of the stolen property was recovered several months later. In February of 1984, 7 people were arrested in connection with the crime. 3 men were convicted in the burglary. However, they were all in custody at the time of the Sorensens' murders. Police will not confirm if anything was taken from the Sorensen home at the time of the murder, but they have stated that nothing was removed from the jewelry store that night. According to a friend of the Sorensens, Doris and Alan potentially took cash and loose diamonds home with them at night. This means that robbery could still potentially be a motive in this case, even though it cannot be made known to the public. The case went cold very quickly, despite Chief Michaels working 16-hour days and traveling to different states to follow up on even the flimsiest of leads. Police have investigated persons of interest, but there have never been any real suspects in the case. As of 2018, the case is considered open but inactive. Roberta Miller, known affectionately as Bobby, lived a life full of family and activity. She had 6 siblings and raised 2 children of her own. She had recently finalized divorce from her husband, Gary Miller. She had previously worked at her husband's car dealership but was now working in real estate following her divorce. She had also decided to go back to school and study business. The Guilford, New Hampshire resident loved crafts and hiking on nearby Mount Major. She spent Halloween of 2010 at a hardware store shopping for supplies to make new flower boxes for her living room windows. The rich life of 54-year-old Bill was tragically cut short, however, when she was killed inside her home on the evening of October 31st. Bobby's body was discovered by her adult son Jonathan the following day. She had been shot multiple times. Bobby's yellow lab named Sport had also been killed by several gunshots. Police found no signs of forced entry. Bobby's family rented a billboard on Route 104 in Meredith, New Hampshire to ask for information and offer a reward in Bobby's case. The billboard is yet to generate an answer to the mystery of Bobby's murder, but in 2018 it did generate controversy. The usual message was briefly covered with a new sign questioning whether or not Bobby's son Jonathan was cooperating fully with the investigation into his mother's death. Jonathan has always maintained that he had nothing to do with his mother's death. He accuses his Uncle Ken of putting up the billboard, citing long-standing tension between the two of them. Ken has never confirmed if he was indeed the person who changed the billboard. The tensions within Bobby's family aside, they continue to fight to find out who took her life on Halloween of 2010. In 1983, 28-year-old Nancy Penner lived in Paradise, California with her boyfriend, Jeff Jeffries, and her 2 children. 4-year-old Omar was from a previous relationship, and infant Yana was Jeff's daughter. On Halloween night, Nancy was invited to celebrate at a friend's Halloween party. She never made it to the party. October 31st will be the last time anyone had contact with Nancy. When Nancy's brother tried to invite her to Thanksgiving dinner and could not contact her, he began to worry. He filed a missing persons report for her on December 19th. 3 days later, when he should have been celebrating Nancy's 29th birthday, Jeff Jeffries left California and flew to Hawaii with Nancy's 2 children. He eventually returned to the mainland United States, leaving Omar in California and dropping Yana off with his stepsister in Iowa. Jeff committed suicide in 1986. Omar was eventually adopted and changed his name to Daniel. In 2010, while acting in the play Masquerade at the Moulin Rouge, Daniel suffered what he described as a meltdown and began attending therapy. Coincidentally, he was in the process of transitioning back to using his birth name at this time. During therapy, Omar began remembering upsetting details from his early life. He remembered hearing Yana crying and seeing Jeff with his hand behind the toilet in the family bathroom. He remembered Jeff shooting and his mother running out of the house clutching her arm. This was the last memory he had of his mother. Police investigating the original missing persons report on Nancy did discover a bullet lodged in the bathroom cabinet of her home, corroborating Omar's recollection. It is unclear if this memory of Omar's is from the night Nancy went missing or sometime previous to it. The most obvious assumption to make is that Jeff chased Nancy from the house and killed her. Jeff reportedly owned property in rural Butte County, leading to speculation that he could have disposed of Nancy's body there. Unless Nancy's remains are found, however, it cannot even be said for sure if she is deceased. Furthermore, Nancy and Jeff grew pot at their home. If Nancy had been shot accidentally in a scuffle, or Jeff had to shoot her in self-defense, Jeff may not have wanted to alert the police. If Nancy did die on Halloween in 1983, it was not necessarily murder. Without Jeff Jeffries, even if Nancy's remains are found, the exact circumstances of her death may never be fully understood. Omar reconnected with his half-sister, Yana, in the 1990s. He has submitted a DNA sample to the police to hopefully help in Nancy's case. In 2010, he was finally able to locate and contact his birth father, Nancy's high school sweetheart. The case of Savannah Gold. In 2017, Sherry's world was turned upside down in Florida when her daughter Savannah failed to show up for work at the restaurant where she was employed. Sherry was unaware that this ordinary day would be the last time she'd see Savannah. An hour later, the restaurant called Sherry to inform her that Savannah hadn't arrived for her shift, which was unusual since she had never missed work before. The events that unfolded after that call were even more bizarre. When Savannah's father received a message on her behalf, riddled with spelling mistakes and lacking punctuation, he instantly knew it wasn't his 21-year-old daughter who had written it. The impersonator claimed Savannah had met an amazing guy, fallen in love, and decided to elope with him, promising to call later, paying close attention to its content. He knew his daughter well and was convinced that running away with her boyfriend was out of character for her. While Daniel studied his phone screen, trying to make sense of the message, Savannah's older brother Chris received a similar text, saying she was leaving with her boyfriend and that she was okay. Daniel's instincts told him something was wrong, so he immediately started calling his only to find it turned off. Savannah Page Gold was born on April 26, 1996, to Daniel and Sherry Gold. She lived with her parents and older brother, Chris, in Jacksonville, Florida. Savannah enjoyed various hobbies, including playing lacrosse, drawing, and dancing. Those close to her believed she embodied her last name, being a loving, kind, and caring person always willing to help others. Savannah turned down a college scholarship for art and design to care for her mother, Sherry, who had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing chemotherapy. To support her mother, Savannah took on household responsibilities and also worked as a waiter at Bonefish Grill, a restaurant. By the summer of 2017, she had been working at the restaurant for 2 years. On August 2nd, Savannah left for work at around 5 p.m. wearing her uniform, as her shift was scheduled to start at 5:30 p.m. However, less than an hour later, Sherry received a call from the restaurant asking why Savannah had not shown up for work. This surprised Sherry, as she knew her daughter was responsible and had seen her leave the house in her uniform, indicating that she had indeed gone to work. After Savannah's father received a suspicious phone call, her father and brother started getting strange messages that they didn't think were from her. They suspected someone was impersonating Savannah. Before this, Savannah's father had tried to contact the police, but he couldn't reach his daughter. She was reported missing, and the police launched a search for her. Since sending those messages, Savannah's phone and social media accounts have been inactive. The police first went to the establishment, where she worked, to investigate. They found her unlocked car in the parking lot, about 120 yards from the restaurant entrance. Her personal documents, wallet, cards, cash, and other valuable items were still inside the car. It was clear to the police that the story about Savannah running away with her lover was a lie. If Savannah had planned to disappear, she would have taken her documents and bank cards with her to avoid being traced. It didn't make sense that she would leave them behind in her car. Initially, there were no signs of a struggle or crime near or inside the car, except for the flat left front tire. Forensic experts were called to investigate, and detectives visited the restaurant to speak with Savannah's coworkers. However, they all claimed that Savannah hadn't come to work that day and that no one had seen her. The presence of Savannah's car parked 120 yards from the restaurant led detectives to suspect that something might have happened to her after she arrived at work. They began canvassing local establishments, particularly those with surveillance cameras, to review the footage and identify the moment Savannah parked her car. Although the image quality was poor, the police were able to see from the footage that Savannah parked her car, got out, and walked to a nearby silver Chevrolet Malibu sedan. For 14 minutes, she stood next to the driver's door, talking to the person behind the wheel. She then opened the back door and got in, and the driver followed suit. The police watched as the car shook, and the back door swung open 3 times before being closed again. Officers suspected that a fight had broken out inside the car between Savannah and the Chevrolet's owner. The man exited the car, approached Savannah's vehicle, opened the driver's door, and removed something from inside. He then punctured the front left tire, got back into his vehicle, and drove away without Savannah ever getting out. The owner of the Chevrolet Malibu was quickly identified as Lee Rodarte, a 28-year-old manager and chef at the restaurant where Savannah worked. He had helped distribute flyers with Savannah's picture during the police investigation and claimed not to have seen her for about 3 weeks, citing their different work shifts. However, when detectives re-interviewed restaurant employees, they discovered that Lee and Savannah's relationship went beyond a professional one. Several people came forward to reveal that the two had met secretly after hours and were romantically involved, a fact that Lee had failed to disclose to the police. During his work shift, Rodarte was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. When he arrived, he immediately warned the detectives that he struggled with reading and writing. In response, they thoroughly explained his rights, including his right to an attorney and the fact that anything he said could be used against him in court. Rodarte then admitted that he had previously lied to the police when they interviewed the restaurant staff, saying he hadn't seen Savannah in a long time. In reality, he had seen her on the day she went missing, but he was afraid that if he told the truth, he would become a suspect in her disappearance, which is why he had lied. Lee said he had met Savannah about 2 years ago, when she started working at the restaurant. However, their socializing outside of work began around 8 months ago. At that time, he was already in a relationship with someone named Chelsea. When Chelsea discovered he had been unfaithful to her, she ended their relationship. Rodarte claims he dated Savannah for 3 months before she started using illegal drugs, which led him to end their relationship and reunite with Chelsea. Following the breakup, Rodarte and Savannah allegedly agreed to maintain a professional relationship limited to their work at the restaurant, as per company policy, prohibiting romantic relationships among employees. Rodarte also states that Savannah had disclosed their intimate relationship to other waiters, with the intention of getting him fired. Lee last saw Savannah on a Wednesday afternoon. He drove to the mall on August 2nd to talk to her and persuade her not to spread rumors about their relationship, as he feared losing his job at the restaurant where he had worked for 5 years. When he met her, Savannah had just taken a strong substance and was panicking, so she asked if she could sit in his car for a bit. Once inside, Lee demanded that she stop telling people they were still dating. Savannah asked him to join her in the back seat so they could talk. After moving to the back seat, Lee again asked Savannah to stop spreading rumors, but she refused, saying she would do as she pleased. This response infuriated Lee, who then got out, slashed a tire on Savannah's car and returned. When Savannah asked why he had done it, Lee admitted he was upset and angry. Next, as Rodarte claimed, Savannah exited his vehicle and headed towards the mall entrance, but didn't reach it. Instead, she got into an old green Ford pickup truck with tinted windows. At this point, she was holding her phone. However, detectives were aware that Savannah never left Rodarte's car and that he was lying. Unbeknownst to Rodarte, the police had surveillance footage that disproved his claim, showing no Ford pickup truck and Savannah remaining in his car. When asked about subsequent events, Lee stated that he drove home, even detailing the streets he took. Notably, the man had scratches on his arms and neck, which he attributed to a workplace injury when questioned about their origin. He claimed to have no knowledge. The detectives adjusted their questioning strategy. At first, they listened attentively to his stories, showing interest, but soon they applied gentle pressure. They informed him straightforwardly that evidence contradicted his claim that Savannah had exited his car. After a brief time, Rodarte altered his statement, asserting that he and Savannah had gone to his residence, and then she departed. The detectives remained skeptical and urged him to reveal the entire truth, considering Savannah's family's well-being. Rodarte ultimately admitted to fatally snapping Savannah's neck during a backseat argument in his vehicle. Following their departure from the parking lot, he sent messages to Savannah's father and brother from her phone, before discarding it out the window. But he soon discovered it wasn't as simple as he thought. Instead, he dug a hole and buried the body, only to later exhume it, wrap it in a blanket, and drive approximately 8 miles from the restaurant to a nearby pond where he discarded the body. Although the autopsy couldn't determine the exact cause of Savannah's death, the examination revealed that her neck wasn't broken, as Rodarte had claimed, and no illegal substances were found in her body. However, forensic experts discovered that the thyroid cartilage in Savannah's throat was fractured, suggesting strangulation, and roughly 75% of her body exhibited fire damage. Despite confessing to the crimes, Rodarte maintained his not guilty plea on charges of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a dead body. The autopsy revealed that the condition of Savannah's body was too compromised to determine an exact cause of death. Contrary to Rodarte's claims, her neck was not broken and no illegal substances were found in her system. However, the autopsy did indicate that Savannah was strangled as her thyroid cartilage was broken and approximately 75% of her body had been burned. Rodarte's confession was revoked at trial, where he claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging that Savannah had initiated the strangulation. This reversal put Savannah's family through additional trauma, forcing them to attend numerous court hearings. Gold, Savannah's mother, has battled recurring cancer during this ordeal, but she remains committed to attending every hearing alongside her family. They have been present at 26 out of 27 hearings. Enduring the emotional toll of facing Rodarte, the man responsible for their daughter's death. The family's primary concern now is to bring this painful process to a close and secure justice for Savannah. Lee Rodarte was not the only family member to be charged with murder. In 2016, a year before Lee committed his crime, his sister Amber Camarillo, then 26 and still known by her maiden name Rodarte, shot and killed a woman during a dispute over a car. She received a 20-year prison sentence. Lee Rodarte was offered a plea deal, which required him to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 40-year prison sentence. In return, the charges of tampering with physical evidence and abuse of the body would be dropped. After consulting with his attorneys, Rodarte accepted the deal and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. On March 11, 2021, following the verdict, Savannah's family expressed gratitude to everyone for their support. Daniel Gold stated that they loved Savannah and were overwhelmed to discover how many others also cared for her. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.